All right, guys, do more fantasy baseball rankings. We're moving on to starting pitchers. Evaluating starting pitchers is my favorite part about fantasy baseball, and I have a lot to say about the top 50 pitchers this year, with a sleeper video coming next week as well for guys I didn't mention at all. But before we get going, I want to thank you guys again for the great support so far in this channel. The goal after the last video is 500 subscribers. We smashed that goal, and we're already to 600, so I'm going to be bold here. I want to be adventurous. Let's get to 1,000 subscribers by the end of next week. 1,000 subscribers. Remember, if you guys like this video, please click the little like button down there, and again, the big red button down there is subscribe to the channel. The goal is 1,000 subscribers. Thank you guys again so much. All right, now let's get into it. Starting off with tier 1, we have the best two pitchers of fantasy baseball. We have Tarik Skubal and we have Paul Skenes. I have Skubal over Skenes just because I think between ceiling and floor, he's the best guy overall. Him being actually fully healthy for the first time last year unleashed a total monster. He ended 2023 healthy and he was dominant down the stretch. That allowed him to go into last offseason being able to train rather than rehab. Being allowed to train rather than rehab had him actually work on his stuff. He got bigger, he got stronger, he was throwing harder, he was sitting 97 miles an hour, he touched 102 last year. He had better command, his changeup was improved, and he still plays in Detroit, which is one of the best pitchers parks in the league. He's the fantasy ace for me. Then you have Paul Skenes. Skenes came on the scene last year and was such a superstar. And truthfully, I think I'd be comfortable with him going over Skubal if I was confident the Pirates were going to allow him to get to 200 plus innings this year. I just don't know if that's the case yet, because he does so many things well, and truthfully as a rookie, I was shocked by his incredible pitch ability. We knew he threw 100 miles an hour, we knew he had a devastating slider and a deep repertoire, but he came back with a splinker through the early part of last season. What the splinker is kind of this variant, splitter, sinker, fusion pitch that only monsters like Paul Skenes can throw when they're sitting 100 miles an hour. And it truthfully became one of the best pitches in Major League Baseball like that. And then more pitchability, something like the way he got more comfortable with his changeup as the season went on, where it was a pitch that was his 4th or 5th option for most of the season. And then all of a sudden he comes in September, it's his second most thrown pitch against left-handed batters, and he's getting 60% whiffs. Like, who does something like that? He's truthfully different. He is the future number one for sure, but right now him and Skubal are neck and neck, and the difference is probably those projected innings. But the Skenes was number one even by a lot. I wouldn't be shocked. All right, moving on to tier 2, we have Zach Wheeler, Garrett Crochet, Logan Gilbert, Corbin Burns, and Cole Reagans. First, Wheeler has to lead this tier simply until we're proved otherwise. This is a pitcher on basically a Hall of Fame trajectory. His ERA is always in the high 2s or low 3s. His whip is always the low 1s. It's tons of strikeouts. He got the splitter going last year to be a new wrinkle against left-handed batters. He continues to get older, and he's an elite starting pitcher until we're proved otherwise. Next is Garrett Crochet, who is so good. Truthfully, if he got traded to a team with a better pitcher's home park besides Fenway and the Red Sox, he might be in the tier 1 for me along with Skubal and Skenes. That's how good I think he is. And that's also how much I trust his health based on how the White Sox handled him down the stretch last year. The fact that they let him continue to start on his regular days of rest, but limit his outings, that's the best thing they possibly could have done for his health moving forward. Also, his fastball and cutter are so good, he basically doesn't even need a third pitch against a hitter from either side of the plate. And he has a sweeper coming along just to add more to it. If he gets more weapons and proves that he can pitch in Fenway Park, he has an outside shot to be the SP1 this year, truthfully. Next up is Logan Gilbert, who's one of my favorite pitchers to draft last season. He's a hoss at 6'6", 220 pounds. He has top of the league extension, so he releases the ball as close to the batters as possible. He throws 97 miles an hour, which feels like 100 because of that extension. And that slider, that perfect, true drop-down gyro slider, just gets on hitters so well and is effective against guys from both sides of the plate. Also, one of my favorite things about Gilbert, and you'll see this as a theme as we move through these rankings, Seattle's one of the best parks in the league for pitchers to pitch in. It boosts strikeouts and is hard to hit home runs. And their pitching infrastructure seems amazing, as all of these guys, Gilbert and the rest, are all tinkering, changing up their pitch mixes, changing up their grips, finding new things, getting rid of old things that don't work. They have a great thing going in Seattle. And Gilbert just has so many ways to beat guys. Last year he threw 5 different pitches at least 10% of the time to left-handed batters and 4 to right-handed batters. He's awesome. Next up we got Corbin Burns. And for Burns, I think the reports of his demise are being a little bit overblown. I feel like last year his strikeouts might have gone down because he knew that he was the only real horse in that Orioles rotation that needed innings, so he's trying to pitch to contact more, especially in such a big cavernous home park, Camden Yards last year. His strikeout rate has fallen 5 years in a row though, and a big part of that is because his cutter isn't the unicorn pitch it once was. When Burns really busted on the scene and became the best pitcher in baseball, that cutter basically moved like a slider, but was thrown as hard as a cutter at 95 miles an hour. There was basically no other pitch like it in the league. Now it's kind of reverted back down to just being a run-of-the-mill good cutter, but it's still a very good cutter. He still has a very deep arsenal. I'm confident Corbin Burns still. Just maybe without the SP1 upside that he's given us over the last few years, but still he's going to throw a lot of innings, win a lot of games, be a very good pitcher. Last on this tier is Cole Reagans, who is simply just very good. He had some second half fatigue last year, and that showed a little bit drop in his velocity, and that made me a bit afraid. But he's come back sitting 97, 98 miles an hour this spring, so I'm all good. And his changeup is really his difference maker. It looks exactly like his fastball until the last millisecond, and that, as a lefty Reagans, makes him very dangerous against right-handed batters. He even still has the upside to go past this tier because he hasn't exactly found great consistency with his breaking balls yet, but if that happens, wow, this could be a true superstar. Now moving on to the next tier. This tier, openly, I'm calling the chaos tier, and that's because this tier has Blake Snell, Tyler Glasnow, Chris Sale, Jacob deGrom, and Spencer Strider. Pure chaos. First up is Snell. I think the Dodgers were very intentional with how they went about signing Snell this offseason. One of the first big free agents to sign, not giving Walker Buehler the qualifying offer as that was happening. Very intentional. I think that's because he is really good, and I think he has the potential to kind of become the workhorse that this Dodgers rotation is missing. Gavin Stone threw the most innings in their team last year with 140. The season before that was Kershaw with 130. They need someone to kind of fuse this whole staff together and throw a bunch of innings, and it's possible that's Snell. And with that, I'm tired of the narrative Blake Snell doesn't pitch deep into games. It's not true anymore. In 2023, he threw at least 6 innings 20 times. That was the same amount as Sandy Alcantara, who was always dubbed as the big workhorse in baseball, and one fewer than Corbin Burns, who was also a major workhorse that year. Blake Snell pitches deep into games. We're ending this narrative. And he's just simply incredible. The way he moves around, his fastball, his slider, his curveball, mixes in the changeup. He's a special pitcher. Truthfully, one of the most talented pitchers in the league. And you can kind of see that by the fact that he's only thrown more than 180 innings twice in his career, and both times he won the Cy Young Award. He leads the chaos tier because he has the most expected volume of all these guys who have super ace stuff, but we don't know how many innings they're going to pitch. Next up, Tyler Glasnow. Just please stay healthy one time. Interestingly enough, in the last 2 seasons, he set his new career high in innings pitched at 134 and 120, so I guess he's trending in the right direction. But the elbow sprain to elbow tendonitis to missing all of the postseason last year is a little bit worrisome, but the top end is still one of the best pitchers in baseball. So I'm going to rank him highly, especially for your 10, 12 team matchup leagues, because you want to take your shots. You want guys who could potentially be amazing, because even if they're just healthy in September, you can ride them to a championship. Next up, we have Chris Sale, which the Chris Sale redemption story last year was incredible, but it does make me feel a little bit weird about how he ended the season with the Braves being a little quiet on his condition, then his back just completely giving out and not being available for them down the stretch and in the postseason. Still, we saw him be super elite for a whole season and win the Cy Young Award without the super velo that he used to have early in his career, kind of sitting 95 now. He very much belongs in the chaos ace tier for all these reasons. Then the most chaotic ace of them all, Jacob deGrom. Why not, right? He is healthy right now, and that's a huge thing for deGrom, because if he's healthy, he might still be the best pitcher on planet Earth. And he said during spring training that he's open this year to toning down his velocity from 100 to 97. And that's important because 1, maybe it helps him stay healthy longer, and 2, he won 2 Cy Young Awards and he was sitting around 96, 97 with the Mets. Just be aware that when you're drafting Jacob deGrom, the Rangers are going to be really, really careful about how they use him, because they're a team with true World Series aspirations and they want him healthy for that stretch run. That might mean that he's pitching his best ball in September when you're trying to win a fantasy championship. That could work out great. Or he just gets hurt again. Bottom line, I don't expect him to throw more than 120, max 130 innings this season, but there's a chance that those 130 innings are some of the best innings in baseball. And with that, knowing your league, there's a spot for deGrom. But that also means you have to understand the rest of your pitching staff. You can't be taking multiple guys from this tier, especially if one of those guys are deGrom. You have to be able to insulate a guy like deGrom, a guy like Tyler Glasnow, with big innings eaters behind them. Safe guys like Max Fried, Justin Steele, Logan Webb. Guys who you are very confident are going to be out there for big bulk. And that way, you can protect yourself against the potential and probable injuries that occur when shopping in the Chaos Ace tier. Whose final member is Spencer Strider. Strider, we're getting some good reports on his health. Apparently, he's going to appear in a game this spring, and all signs point to him making his debut this season in late April. Things can change. He's very careful, and the Braves also have World Series aspirations, so I'm sure they will slow play Strider to ensure that he's ready for the end of the season rather than the beginning. But when he was using his new curveball last spring, he looked so ridiculously good, and he might walk back in and again be one of the best pitchers in baseball immediately upon being healthy. But we will learn a lot by his appearances this spring. All right, moving on to the next tier. These guys who have near ace stuff and pretty good workloads, just not the ace stuff of the tier above, but you can probably be more confident the players in this tier are going to give you more innings than the players in the tier above. And these guys are Yoshinobu Yamamoto, Dylan Cease, Bryce Miller, Michael King, Joe Ryan, and Spencer Schwellenbach. You probably heard some maybe surprising names in this tier, but I'll go through everyone, starting with Yamamoto. He's got more of that same Dodger stuff where we know his workload is probably capped based on how many pitchers they have and how little they care about the regular season just to get as many guys healthy to the playoffs as possible. But I don't think people realize how good he was in the 100 innings he pitched, and I wouldn't be surprised at all if he has 150 innings, 3.3 ERA, 15 wins, and 200 strikeouts this year. That seems like a very plausible future for Yamamoto. Next up is Dylan Cease, who's someone I like rather than love just because we've never seen the command ever take a step for Cease, and we've also never seen him meaningfully add to his pitch mix. That makes him a little bit predictable and kind of fall out a little bit against left-handed batters, and also if he loses command of his really good fastball, really good slider, you see some blow-ups. He does throw some curveballs here and there. He has thrown some changeups this spring. Maybe one of those pitches becomes a meaningful third offering, and then Cease can really skyrocket. But for now, I am a little bit concerned about Cease and don't really think of him as a true ace for all of these reasons. Next up is my guy this year, and that's Bryce Miller. Like I said when talking about Logan Gilbert, the Mariners pitchers always get a bump, and Miller will enjoy that bump at home, but he's a true student of the game, and it's really impressed me how much he's transformed himself as a pitcher in his short time in the major leagues. He came into the league as a fastball-heavy strike thrower who was just trying to get it by guys and kind of muscle his way through lineups. Now, he's picked up so many pitches over the last few years, he's become this true wide arsenal guy who has a million ways to beat you. My favorite story about Miller picking up a new pitch was last season when the Mariners signed reliever Michael Baumann to their team. Baumann has this great spike curveball that he said he had a 10-second conversation about with Miller, and then his next start he was already throwing it. Baumann was only on the team for 50 days, and Miller picked up this new new pitch in that short period of time. From the first time he threw that pitch in a game until the end of the season, Miller made 15 starts and he had a 1.94 ERA over that time. That pitch was a true difference maker for him. Now he's got a splitter too, tons of weapons to go along with the already great fastball. I really love him in drafts and he's been a big target for me because where I have him ranked is way, way, way higher than where he's currently being taken. Next up is Michael King, who might have the most ignorantly impressive command in all of baseball. It allows him to kind of pitch a different way than other guys. He's a righty who throws sinkers to left-handed batters. He throws sweepers to left-handed batters, and he throws changeups to right-handed batters. And that's because he's so certain about where he can place these pitches. He can throw pitches to batters of certain handedness that's kind of taboo, but he can get away with it again because the command is so pinpoint. He got smacked around a little bit early last season before it really seemed like he acclimated to becoming a starting pitcher, moving from the bullpen. But of his final 24 starts this season after May 1st, he only allowed more than 2 runs 4 times. That's incredible. The only concern I have with King is, again, because the command is his calling card, command is something that can oscillate a little bit more year to year, week to week, month to month than something like a pitcher's pure stuff, like a guy like Cease. Those two are kind of the antithesis of each other, and they're so close in my rankings because I don't really know who's going to be better, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's either of them. Next up is Joe Ryan, who's another pitcher I'm planting my flag on this season. He's been very quietly becoming a stud, learning how to pitch here and there as time goes on. When he came into the league similar to Bryce Miller, it was just fastball, fastball, fastball. But his fastball was really good, so he was able to get away with it until a certain time where he became a little predictable and hitters were able to square that up. A big reason for that is that anytime batters got ahead in the count, they knew his fastball was coming. In 2022, when hitters were ahead in the count, he threw the fastball over 70% of the time. In 2023, it was 67% of the time. And then as he's added a sweeper and a splitter to his repertoire, he's been able to get less predictable and mix things up more. Last season, when batters were ahead, he was barely throwing that fastball 50% of the time. And overall, his fastball usage dropped below 50% for the first time in his career with these new added pitches. His whip was under 1 last year when he was on the mound, and I really think that if he would have completed the season, he could have been a top 10 or 15 pitcher in the whole league. He's a smash to me right now, and I think that he has a really, really good shot to be a top 10 kind of guy this year. Last up in this tier is Spencer Schwellenbach, and this guy is so good. He's so freaking good. The craziest way I can describe how good Spencer Schwellenbach is by the fact that the Braves called him up last year after he only threw 110 minor league innings. This came after he was a two-way player in college at Nebraska and mostly relief pitcher and only threw 31 total innings there. So that means Spencer Schwellenbach threw fewer than 150 total innings of organized baseball between high school and the major leagues and still stepped into the show and was an ace right away. That's crazy. He has a legit 5-pitch mix and even adds a sinker onto the back of that just for good measure. He has tons of weapons to combat batters from both the right and left side of the plate, and truthfully the only concern with him is his year-over-year workload just because he threw so many more innings last year than he had in the past. But between him, Bryce Miller, Joe Ryan, and there's one more guy I'm going to talk about in a few minutes who can really be this year's breakout guys, the guys who are being taken outside the top 20, outside the top 25, and can wind up being true top 5 or top 10 kinds of pitchers, just like Logan Gilbert last year. All right, now moving on to the next tier, we have George Kirby, Max Fried, Justin Steele, Hunter Brown, Pablo Lopez, Tanner Bybee, Brian Wu, and Jared Jones. Now this tier, you're still comfortable if these guys are your SP2s coming out of the draft, but they either have a little bit more risk or a little bit less upside than the guys I've already mentioned. Starting with George Kirby, who the Mariners have already announced will begin the season on the IL with some shoulder issues. I think I might be in the minority, I might be being stupid, but I don't really care about this right now. It seems like this is a precautionary measure just to keep Kirby healthy, and I think you're probably still looking at a guy that throws around 160, 155 innings with great ratios and tons of strikeouts, and is still the star that we've come to expect from Kirby, and remains the high-end pitcher that we've come to expect from Kirby over the last few years. Next up is Max Fried, who's just a really, really, really good pitcher. Deep repertoire, tons of ways to get hitters out, really smart on the mound, very cerebral. He's getting dinged a little bit, I think, in the public for moving to Yankee Stadium, but he's a left-handed pitcher who suppresses hard contact, so that won't be even as bad inside Yankee Stadium. If you're in a league that favors wins and quality starts and just innings in general, Fried will be a tremendous value. As will the next guy, Justin Steele. Steele does not get the respect he deserves across Major League Baseball. He has a career 3.24 ERA over 500 innings. There's no questioning how good this guy is. In fantasy leagues, when you're taking your risks early on the guys like Sale, deGrom, Glasnow, Snell, that whole tier, you need guys like Fried and Justin Steele to kind of insulate yourself and give yourself some stability that you can count on with much less risk. I think the next pitcher can do that as well, and Hunter Brown, even with a little bit more upside. Brown has become one of my favorite pitchers in the league over the last few years, and it's coming off one of the wildest seasons I've ever seen. He had a 9.78 ERA in May 1st, and the whole year looked like it was going to be a catastrophe from someone who's supposed to be a big breakout guy. Then he started throwing his sinker on May 5th. That gave him an extra wrinkle against right-handed batters and an extra hard pitch just to confuse batters a little bit more, give him something else to think about. From that point on, he had a 2.51 ERA over 150 innings the rest of the season. He had good strikeouts, didn't walk too many batters, all his underlying stuff was amazing. He's thrown a ton of innings the last few years. The Astros should win some games for him, and he's got a deep mix with nasty stuff against hitters from both sides of the plate. He's a smash for me and someone else I can see definitely rising past this tier. Next up is Pablo Lopez, who had an amazing 2023 but kind of fell back to earth in 2024. All his underlying stuff was still good though. His whip was still low. His strikeouts were not as high but still pretty high. I see he's tinkering a bit this spring as well. He's moving over to the right side of the rubber, which should help his sinker, Run inside to the righties better. There's too much good here for him to be as bad as he was last year, and he even really wasn't that bad, truthfully. He's a smash for me. He's a huge bounce back. Next up is Tanner Bybee, who's a guy I've never really been as in on just because I really don't like his fastball. It cuts more than anything else, and it has just average velocity, and it kind of gets tattooed at times. There's been moments where he's been able to get more ride on that fastball, throw it a little bit harder, and just perform better, but he has not been able to maintain it. The rest of his repertoire is incredible, though. A plus changeup that plays well off the fastball and is effective against lefties. A nasty slider that kind of morphed into more of a cutter-ish thing last year, but it was still really gross, and allowed him to experiment with a little bit more of a sweepier slider that have more movement and less velocity, and a little bit of a curveball too, just enough of a curveball to keep him honest. It's a steady workload and a good team and a good park and an easy division. That's a guy you can rely on. Now, last two guys here who I'm very aggressive on compared to the rest of the field, and that's Bryan Woo and Jared Jones. First, Woo is kind of the people's breakout. He's always been amazing when he's been on the mound, but he always gets a little bit nicked up, an injury there, and always has to miss time, which kills his momentum. But nevertheless, his fastball is so good and so unique. From his low release point with a really tight approach angle and amazing extension, it gets on hitters in a hurry, and it's kind of the staple of his entire repertoire. It allows him to do whatever he wants against both sides of the plate because no one can catch up to this fastball. But he still really could use a breaking ball to supplement the whole thing. And he's been working on a sweeper. It was coming along last season. It didn't have the same pinpoint command as the rest of his arsenal has, but he's clearly working on a lot this spring, as it's been one of his most thrown pitches. That would be a huge development. Also, he probably does need one more thing for left-handed batters. Again, that four-seam fastball is good enough to devastate the lefties, but it needs some help. He threw too many sinkers against lefties last year, and right-handed sinkers don't perform well against left-handed batters. Maybe there's going to be a cutter. Maybe he refines his slider to give him more of that straight up and down gyro movement so it can play better against lefties. There's a lot of ways for Bryan Woo to become an ace this season. That's why I have him ranked so highly. And then last in this tier is Jared Jones, who honestly might be an ace already. He burst on the scene last spring, dominating with his fastball and slider, won a rotation spot out of camp as a rookie, and had a ridiculous first 2 months of the season. Then he got a bit predictable, he got a little fatigued, and then he wound up pulling his lat and missing a few months. He came back and didn't look very good, but that troubling second half is why he's been a bargain so far this draft season. He's back this spring with a new sinker and an improved changeup that gives him one new weapon each against a hitter from each side of the plate. And if all these things coalesce, I wouldn't be surprised if you look up in the middle of May and you're like, oh, Jared Jones, one of the 5 best pitchers in baseball. Cool, that makes sense. All right, now moving on to the next tier. We have Logan Webb, Bailey Ober, Framber Valdez, Shota Imanaga, Hunter Green, and Luis Castillo. First is Logan Webb. This guy's quality. He's going to eat up a bunch of innings, wins leagues, quality starts league. He's getting you that. But be aware, his stuff has fallen a little bit the last few years, so his upside is definitely capped by rapidly decreasing strikeout rate. So be aware of that. Then we have Bailey Ober, who has become one of the steadier pitchers in baseball. Since the beginning of the 2022 season, his 1.03 whip is 4th best in the league. You guys know who's 1, 2, 3? It's Tarik Skubal, Zach Wheeler, and Garrett Cole. That's how good Bailey Ober is at limiting base runners. His ERA fell a bit last year because of some blow-ups and some home run issues, but he's so steady. Don't be worried about Bailey Ober. Then we got Framber Valdez, who, man, this trio, this is consistency right here, while being unspectacular and probably a little bit underappreciated. Last year, Valdez having a 60% ground ball rate and 24% strikeout rate is nasty work. Not many hitters are entering in that bat against Valdez with even the chance to do real damage against him. His walks are still a little bit high though, and they keep his whip above an area where he can truly be considered one of the game's elites. And 575 innings over 3 years does make me a little bit scared about the future of his elbow, but still a very stable, trustworthy guy. Then we have Shota Imanaga. He's probably a little too low in this rankings because maybe I'm overreacting a bit too much to his one spring start where his velocity in his fastball was way down and his vertical movement in that fastball is also way down. That's more meaningful for a guy like Imanaga though, because his fastball is everything. It's the entire crux of what his repertoire stands on. If that's dead, then the whole thing's probably dead too. So I'm just kind of baking in that risk by ranking him over here at 30. Next up, we have Hunter Green, who I really believe in, and I really want to put him in that tier above with my big breakouts like Jones and Woo and Bybee and all those guys. But for some reason, I just don't think he's as close to being a legitimate ace as those guys are. And a big reason because last year during his breakout, he had some of the craziest batted ball luck I've ever seen. Mostly because he had an over 15% infield fly rate, which is well above the league average, and a home run rate that was first so much lower than the major league average, and two, so much lower than his career averages. It makes me think it can't be sustainable, especially as a power pitcher with a fastball lives in the top of the zone in a place like Great American Ballpark where the ball flies out of. I do have to give him credit though. He worked really hard last season to add more vertical movement on that fastball, to live better at the top of the strike zone and get above hitters' bats, and he has that with the big velocity. You can't take that away from him. But we probably do need to see either his curveball or more likely his splitter take a step before he's able to join the next rank of guys. Lastly now is Luis Castillo, who's still really good, but you can start to feel the chinks in his armor as the guy's trending in the wrong direction. His velocity's ticked down from 97 to 95 over the last few years. His whiff rate's fallen sharply. The changeup and the slider just aren't as dominant as they once were. His park still keeps him good. You can still count on those innings. You can still count a good bit of strikeouts. But again, this is a guy who's kind of tracking in the wrong way rather than the right way. And then moving on to the next tier. It's a very small tier of 3 guys who could not be more different. And that's Aaron Nola, Shane McClanahan, and Sandy Alcantara. First, Nola. Nola is just your 2012 Toyota Camry. You can rely on him and he will always be there. It will not be spectacular and it might not always be the flashiest ride, but Nola's getting you where you want to go. Trust Aaron Nola. Then Shane McClanahan, who is so nasty and I'm so excited for him to be back. But I just really can't see him going much higher than 100 innings this season. And honestly, that being his workload ceiling in my estimation makes me feel a little dirty ranking him even even this high, but the stuff has been so good this spring, and it was so good before he got hurt. More than anything else, I'm just excited to be able to watch him pitch again. Last up is Sandy Alcantara. The Marlins and him have said very different things. It's very snip, snap right now, as opposed to if he has an innings limit this year. As of right now, the last thing we heard is no innings limit, but I really can't believe that because it seems very obvious the Marlins, who are horrible, are going to try and trade him. And it makes sense for them to hold back his workload early in the season, show that he's still the same guy, but keep it tight so whoever trades for him can use him in the playoff race. And again, they've already shown that he might be the same guy. He's blazing 99 miles an hour through this spring. The whole repertoire looks amazing. He looks back to health, and when he's on the mound, he's very, very hard to hit. Honestly, this ranking down here, outside the top 30, might make me look really stupid in a month or two when Sandy is just busting upper 90s and hitters can't square him up. All right, next up we have another chaos tier. Breakout and sleepers I really like. It's Gavin Williams, Christopher Sanchez, and Ryan Pepiot. But first up is Williams. And truthfully, we're about that time where the Guardians are ready to birth another ace. They're one of the best organizations in baseball for pitching development, and Williams might be next up there. We're seeing some adjustments that happen this offseason take place right now for Williams in the spring, where his fastball has a little bit more velocity and a couple of added inches of IVB on it, rising up above the top of the strike zone. He just had a spring start where he got more fastball whiffs in 2 1/3 innings than he had in any individual start last year, any entire start the last regular season. More whiffs in 2 innings this spring than any start all of last season. That shows me something is new here and better. You add in the fact that he's already 6'6" with 95th percentile extension, and that 97-mile-an-hour fastball that has more life in the top of the zone probably feels like 101 to the hitters. His slider is also revamped right now. Last year it blended a little bit too much with his cutter, where so far this spring it's come down a few ticks in velocity, has more sweep and more drop, becoming a much more distinct pitch. He hasn't thrown that cutter or his changeup so far this spring, but at least just having them to go along with its great fastball and great slider, this looks like a guy with a full repertoire who could rise up and be an animal this year. He was a high draft pick, he has high pedigree, just stay healthy, maintain these changes, and this is a guy who could rise up quickly. Next is Christopher Sanchez, who last year had a 3.32 ERA and 100 innings pitched, and then the year before, a 3.44 ERA and another 100 innings pitched. This is just a guy who's really good at suppressing runs, and that's huge for fantasy baseball. Low strikeouts though, so bake that in when you're building your team, but be aware, this spring, he's striking out more batters and also sitting 98 miles an hour compared to the 95, 96 he was last year. Truthfully, I don't buy that. These are shorter starts, so I think he's just airing it out, but keep it in your tickler file just in case. No matter what, he's a ground ball king who's really good at suppressing runs and has shown the ability to take on tons of volume in a season. Lastly, here's Ryan Pepiot. Pepiot is someone who would be clean in my top 30 if the Rays were still playing in Tropicana Park this year. But moving out to Steinbrenner Field, it's definitely going to be an uphill battle. However, his arsenal is completely nasty, with a four-seamer, a changeup, and a gross slider. He also mixes in a cutter and a curveball that look good as well. A little fun thing about Pepiot too, being traded from the Dodgers to the Rays before last season for Ryan Glasnow, the Dodgers do this thing with pitchers, even with fastballs as good as Pepiot's, where they like them to throw them low in the zone, where really they play much better high in the zone where they can get more swings and misses. The Rays helped him adjust, put that fastball high in the zone to play off his changeup and his slider, and the whole thing came together really, really nicely. It's an amazing foundation, and I wouldn't be surprised if we saw a 200 strikeout season this year from Pepiot, just with a little bit more ERA risk because of the park and the opponents in that division. All right, now moving on to the boring veteran tier. Woohoo! We got Zach Gallen, Freddie Peralta, Sonny Gray, Jack Flaherty, Seth Lugo, and Robbie Ray. That's the fun one. But starting out with Gallen. The curveball is still gross and a true plus offering, but I'm a little bit worried about how much life his fastball has lost over the last few years and how much that has affected his whip at ERA. And I hate to say this out loud, but it does feel like he's been running away from a big injury for a long time. Again, losing life on the fastball year over year, having some forearm and elbow issues a few years ago. I'm a little bit scared of Gallen right now, truthfully. Maybe I shouldn't be, but I am. Next up is Freddie Peralta, who kind of to me is like the lesser version of Luis Castillo, where he's getting a little bit older, he's losing some life on his pitches, especially his fastball, which is always his bread and butter. And that's going to hurt his profile a lot because he's never been able to really meaningfully add to his repertoire to truthfully go along with that fastball and slider. So I'm a little bit worried about Peralta, but still trust him at least for this year. Next up, Sonny Gray, another steady Eddie. Some minor health stuff the last few seasons, but you're looking at a horse who can provide good strikeouts and a good home ballpark and pitch deep into games. That's a great pitcher. Then Jack Flaherty, who I am much lower than the field on Jack Flaherty. I'm just terrified watching the shape of the season last year, watching his velocity tick down as the year went on, pitch some of his worst ball in the postseason, and then this year he's a free agent, and no one's willing to offer him a multi-year contract. That's big blinking red lights for me. This year, maybe I'm underrating him, maybe he's still very good, but again, blinking red lights on Jack Flaherty right now. Then Seth Lugo, who's just such a solid vet, but I just can't see him repeating what he did last year, because he was just so good last year. But being able to mix 9 pitches the way he does, dot them anywhere he wants in the strike zone, he's truthfully and sneakily one of the most fun pitchers to watch in the league. A true artisan of his craft. Lastly, we have Robbie Ray, who is a spring king right now. 17 strikeouts and no walks in 9 innings. 17 strikeouts and no walks in 9 innings. Imagine if someone did that in a complete game, that would be national news. Also, a very big deal. This offseason, he talked about reaching out to Tarik Skubal and learning his changeup grip. Ray has always been known as the fastball slider guy with a couple knuckle curves. If he can add a changeup to that, might be a whole new pitcher, someone who's looking to regain that ace status he had a few years ago. But you're always still going to get the Robbie Ray chaos of a bunch of walks once in a while, so be advised. All right, now the last tier we got here. This is some risk, but still guys I wanted to include in the top 50. We have Kodai Senga, Brandon Pfaadt, Roki Sasaki, Jackson Jobe, Reese Olson, and Nick Pivetta. First up is Kodai. You guys see the Mets poster behind me. I want Kodai to be successful so badly, and I saw how good he can be when he's on during the second half of that 2023 season. But there's just some continuously worrying signs about him, his health, and his shoulder, missing the last year. Then the calf came up at the end. Weird workload so far this spring. The upside's amazing, and him throwing his new sinker this spring is also an amazing wrinkle he can have in his right-handed batters at his velocity. But there's still just this twinge of worry I can't get around from Kodai right now until I see him make start after start after start consecutively. And then Brandon Pfaadt, who I really want to put a tier or two above this, but he still just does not have a way to get left-handed batters out. Last season, lefties had an 811 OPS against him, while righties had a 635. That is the difference between an all-star and a bench player. Last year specifically, that was the OPS of Trey Turner and Orlando Arcia, just to give a difference of how comfortable he is against lefties versus righties. His sinker and sweeper are amazing, and that's how he gets the righties out as a right-handed pitcher. But his fastball and his changeup simply aren't that good, and they get pelted against the lefties. So he needs to figure something out to really rise up here. Then we have Roki Sasaki, and I will put my hand up right now. In this draft season, I am the low man on Roki Sasaki. I just don't know how good he's going to be or how much he can pitch. I know the splitter is amazing. It's going to be one of the best pitches in baseball from the jump. But his fastball doesn't look that good. I don't know how many bats it's going to miss. And if that fastball is not missing bats and he really only has one true out pitch, I don't know how valuable he can wind up being in the 110, 120 innings we expect him to pitch. The Dodgers know how good he can be and how good he will be in a few years, and how little the regular season matters to them. So they're going to slow play Sasaki. They're going to be very, very careful with him. You're not going to see many 6-inning starts. I don't know how many wins or quality starts he's going to get. He's a very strange fantasy asset right now because the upside on the pitches is pretty good, but for him to be a value where he's being drafted right now, which is way below the 40s where I have him ranked, he has to be like a Skenes or a Glasnow on a per inning basis, or a deGrom to really be worth it, and I just don't think he's there yet. Next, similar but a little different, we have Jackson Jobe, who feels like he was just kind of made in a pitching lab himself. He already had a deep arsenal of 4+ pitches, and then he came to spring training this year with a new sinker and curveball just to add more to it. He sits upper 90s, tons of breakers, great park to pitch in. He really has it all. But pitching in the major leagues is difficult, and we've seen Jobe's swinging strike rate kind of oscillate through the upper minors, so this might be the year before he truly breaks out. Also, we don't know how the Tigers are going to use him. He's had some injury issues also in the upper minors, so I see him peaking also around 100-ish innings, and that's why he has to be ranked this low, despite the fact I think the upside on the stuff is very, very high. And in a few years, he could be one of the best pitchers in baseball easily. Another guy in the Tigers rotation, one of my guys this year, Reese Olson. His slider is an out pitch, and it's so good that it's truly a weapon against both righties and lefties. Then he has amazing changeup too. That's a great weapon against lefties, has an 8-mile-an-hour velocity difference with his fastball, and both of those two pitches have over a 20% swing strike rate this season. I think he just has to refine his repertoire a little bit, get his command a little bit better. Possibly if he can sit above 95 miles an hour with that fastball would be huge. We don't know if it's there yet because the pitch isn't really that good, so more velocity will help, but I think he can kind of just meander his way to an ERA in the mid-3s this year and is going very, very under the radar in draft season. Lastly, we have Nick Pivetta. I've been waiting on Nick Pivetta breakout for what seems like a decade, but I think this year we're actually going to really, really get it this time. Leaving Fenway Park is such a big deal. That's a very, very tough place to pitch. Since 2021, so 4 full seasons, the Red Sox have only had 2 starting pitchers who threw at least 130 innings with an ERA under 4. That's it. I know their pitching staff hasn't been great over the last 4 years either, but again, I think it's underrated how hard it is to be a productive pitcher for fantasy baseball when you call Fenway Park your home and you have to face teams like the Yankees and the new look Orioles every couple of games. But Pivetta's stuff is still plus. The fastball is silly. The sweeper is ridiculous. The curveball is still good enough. And he doesn't even have a walk problem anymore. I think he might walk into San Diego, working with their pitching coach Ruben Niebla, and just be great from the jump and not look back. But all right, guys, wow, 50 starting pitchers. I can't believe it. Thank you so much for sticking with me in this video. Thank you guys so much for sticking with me in the channel. We're going to have more pitching stuff. We're going to have sleepers. We're going to have the outfield rankings coming out soon. So make sure you are subscribed to the channel. Click that red button if you want to get all of it. But thank you guys again so much, and I'll see you next time.